He's Emeritus Professor of Geology at Western Washington University. He is a nationwide and internationally recognized expert on climate change. He's devoted considerable research in this area in Western North America as well as other parts of the world. We've put his extensive research on our website at nwbc.love, Northwest Business Club, nwbclub.org. And hopefully everyone is on the email list. If you are not on our email list, see Bruce Ayers, stand up, wave your hands, see Bruce Ayers, and give him your email address, and we will make sure that you get on our email list, and we'll make sure that you know to get to the right site, since I probably did that wrong still. How many people got email announcements of this meeting? Outstanding. How many people heard the KGMI or other radio ads that we put on? Outstanding. So we are getting the word out. I really appreciate that. How about a very big round of applause for Dr. Don Easterbrook?
Thanks very much. I hope everybody got something to eat. I felt very badly about crowding a line and taking some food and understanding that there might not be enough to go around. I thought what I would probably do today is to tell you more than you want to know about global warming and CO2 and stuff like that. I spoke to this group about 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, and since then things have changed a bit. If you look at the slide, you'll see that the title has changed a bit, because last time I spoke, the CO2 people were talking about global warming, and the trouble was the globe wasn't warming, and so they thought, well, we better change that. So they changed it to global climate change, and then they got embarrassed because they found out that global climate change meant global cooling. So now the new current thing is global climate disruption. I don't know what it'll be tomorrow. Meaning that every time we have a hurricane, it's because of global warming. That's the new mantra. But what I'd like to do is to show you some data and show you some things. It doesn't really matter whether you're a believer or a non-believer, because I like to talk in terms of data. So I'm going to show you data and let you make up your own mind. I'm not going to tell you anything other than to show you stuff, and then you can decide for yourself what it means. So very quickly, what I hope to do is to tell you some things that the news media are not telling you, and that are not widely known. I think you'll be very surprised at what these things are. I'll also talk a bit about whatever happened to global warming. Why aren't we having global warming anymore? Also, what's in store for the next several decades? We have a pretty good handle on that now. We think we know what we're likely to be encountering. I'll also talk a bit about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the UN, which is what's behind the whole global climate change controversy. And then I hope to show you what it's really all about. It's not about science. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So let's go to the next slide. This may be a long talk on one slide here. Isn't this? Okay, now we're going. Sadly, I have to do a little preamble as a disclaimer, because of all of the kinds of charges that are hurled against people like me, I have to tell you, that I'm a scientist, I'm not a politician, that I have never been paid by big business or by oil companies to go around the country telling all kinds of things that will favor them. I'm an environmentalist. I taught environmental geology at Western for a long time, and I initiated the environmental program there. I am neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I have equal disdain for both parties as a result of what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. So, and I've never taken a nickel from any non-governmental agency for anything I've done or said, just so you know. Otherwise, at the end of the talk, I'll get somebody standing and say, well, isn't it true you're just a shell for big oil and on? So we'll get that out of the way right away. So I thought, what can I show you folks that might bear directly on your lives? What can I tell you that might be of specific interest to you? So I framed these 7 points. Would your business be affected if, and you can read them as we go along, but if the price of electricity were to skyrocket and you could only use a certain amount of electricity, and if you could only use electricity part of the time, if you had to pay a carbon tax, if everything you use had a smart meter on it and measured it, and when you reached your carbon limit, you were all done, and so on. So if any of these affect you, then there are at least 10 things you need to know about. And what I'll do now is to show you 10 things that are factual, and I have the data for all of them. If any of you want to look up more details on the data, I can provide that to you. So I'm going to show you 10 facts that you may or may not know about. The first is that global warming is real. That's never been a debatable point. Every scientist knows that global warming is real. It's been going on for millions of years. So what's the argument about? The argument is whether or not it's being caused by CO2 or not. So when you hear the global warming controversy, if you hear someone say, well, global warming is indisputable, say, yeah, so what? That doesn't prove it's being caused by CO2. I mean, hell, I had hair before CO2, but I don't think, yeah. So at any rate, what I'll show you really quickly are some of the variations that we've gone through in the past. And these are entirely without the benefit of CO2 rising. These are before CO2 began to rise, so CO2 cannot be a factor. The slide you're seeing on the screen here is a slide, it was a slide. Okay. There we go. This is the variation of global warming and cooling just in the past century. We've had 2 periods of global cooling, 2 periods of global warming, and we're presently in a period of global cooling just in the past century. So it's no big deal. And it goes back a lot farther than that. Here's what it looked like during those times. The first global warming period was about 1880 to 1915. It was cold. Most of the temperature records for cold were set in that time interval in North America. From 1915 to about 1945, we had global warming. Most of the warming records were set in the 1930s, not in the past decade. From 1945 to about 1977, we had a period of global cooling. And the blue dots on these diagrams are places, recording stations, where the climate showed cooling trends. The red dots are where it showed warming trends. So if you can follow then the transition from each of these periods, from dominantly warm to dominantly cool, you get a picture of what's going on in the world. Finally, in the period about 1978 to 1998, there was a sudden flip out of the global cooling phase that had been present into what we now call global warming. The only time when global warming was coincident with the rise of CO2. So when you hear people say, this is the warmest it has ever been, we're breaking all-time records, don't believe it. The hottest decade was the 1930s, hotter than it is now, hotter than the past decade. So it's true that we've been warming, there's no doubt about that. We warmed about 0.8 of 1 degree in the past century, but we've been digging ourselves out of a hole from the last little ice age. And of course it's been warming. Next one. This has been going on for hundreds of years and thousands of years. In this graph, the red bumps are periods of global warming. The blue ones are periods of global cooling. And along the bottom is the date, the age, that is the year when these things occurred. And what you'll see is a regular oscillation going from warm to cold, warm to cold, warm to cold, about every 25 years, or 500 years. So this doesn't look like we're suddenly now, all of a sudden, encountering something new, does it? It's been going on for a long time. What you may not know is it's been going on for 10,000 years. The red in this diagram is temperature which is warmer than the present. On the, if you can see this or not, over here on the right-hand side, you see the blue area. And we are now right there. That's the present temperature, present global temperature. So that line is where we are at present. And what you'll see is in almost all of the past 10,000 years, we've been warmer than it is right now. So what's the big deal? We're coming out of the little ice age down here. The blue means it was colder than it is right now, a lot colder. And I'll show you some things about that in a little bit. And then we've been warming up as we've been to thaw out of the little ice age. The point is that we've been through 10,000 years of warming greater than it is now, so what are we worried about? Next one. And there is even greater variation the farther back you go. This is the curve that shows temperature. This is the present temperature right over here on the right-hand side. And you can see this is the last ice age, the big ice age, when we had continental glaciers all over the world. The lines that go up are times of warming. The lines that go down are times of cooling. So we're way up here, and you see the magnitude of the warming and cooling we've been experiencing recently? And look at these. We've experienced temperature rises of 12 degrees in 100 years, several times in the geological past, about 11 to 15,000 years ago. And all of this was without any CO2 being involved at all, because there wasn't anything around to create CO2 that wasn't natural. So the point is that there have been far greater periods of warming, far faster, far more intense, way more, like 15 times more than we've experienced in this latest period of global warming. So it's been going on for millions and billions of years. What you may not know is the place that we're sitting right now here was covered with 6,000 feet of ice 11,000 years ago. And it melted rapidly because of global warming at the end of the last ice age. Again, nothing new here. Oops, we go back one, there, oops. No, you're going for it. Go back 2 or 3 now. There, whoops, can't here for a minute. There we go, stop. Fact number 4 is that global warming is over. And what you may not be aware of, because the news video won't tell you this, is that we have not had any global warming above the temperatures that we had in 1998. No global warming since 1998. Is that a surprise? If all you do is watch TV, you'll find it a surprise, because even today you'll see people who are saying that there's a crisis because the global warming is not only intense, it's getting worse. So that is a fallacy. We have now been having global cooling for about the last decade or so. Here's the trend, and just quickly to show you that in 1999 things took a cooling trend, and the downward slope of this curve, cooling is down, is that we've been cooling. This only goes to 2004, but this continues actually up to the present day. We've had a decade of global cooling is the message here. Next one. And here is a graph that shows, or a map that shows temperatures for the last decade. It's not just this year, last year, the last 10 years. The blue color here and the purple color here across the northern tier shows that the winters have been about 8 degrees colder than normal for the past decade. And there are other places where it's been 5 degrees colder than the past decade. That's the blue area. And most of the peripheral states are 1 to 3 degrees colder in the winter than for the past decade. Not getting warmer, it's getting cooler. Which is kind of embarrassing for the Al Gores of the world. It's a little hard to explain all of this and still maintain that we have global warming. And you won't believe the way they do it. And the way they do it is that the hotter it gets, the colder it's going to be. Think about that. The blacker it gets, the whiter it's going to be. And if you can embrace that in your mind, you'll understand it. Right? Well, all of the predictions of doom and gloom coming from the IPCC and other groups is based on computer modeling. There is no real physical evidence to show that CO2 is causing global warming, period. There's no real physical, it's all computer modeling. I took a computer modeled prediction off the internet IPCC site in 2000, and that's this black curve up here. That's their curve. This is their information, not mine. This is where they predicted we were going to be heading by now, and here's where we are. We're down here. In other words, their computer modeling, which they did in 2000, has failed miserably to predict the temperature just for the past decade. And yet they're predicting a 10-degree temperature rise for the next part of this century until we get to the year 2100. Okay, here's the crux of the matter. Before you read the numbers, how much carbon dioxide do you think is in this room right now? What percentage of the air here is carbon dioxide? How many think? 20%? 10? There's almost nothing, is there? There's so little. And here is how much there is. The atmosphere consists of 38 1,000ths of 1%. That's getting close to nothing. There's almost no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but it's very, very critical to sustain life. Since 1945, the CO2 content has risen. There's no doubt about that as a result of human emissions. But it has risen only to change the composition 8 1,000ths of 1%. What can you do with 8 1,000ths of 1%? And the answer, of course, is precious little. There is not enough carbon dioxide change in the atmosphere to do much of anything. And then you add on that the fact that carbon dioxide really accounts for only about 3% of the total greenhouse effect anyway. The greenhouse effect is dominated by water vapor, 95%. It had nothing to do with CO2. And there's no increase in water vapor content over the past 50 years at least. So the question then is, well, how can we blame us on CO2? Fact number 7, the polar ice caps are not melting. I hear every day in the news media somebody saying there's accelerating melting of the Antarctic ice cap. The polar ice caps are melting. We're all going to go to hell in a handbasket. The truth is that there is no polar ice cap at the North Pole. It's an ocean. There's about a meter rise. And yet Al Gore says 40% of the ice cap in the Arctic is gone already, and the rest of it's going to melt in the next 5 to 10 years. Well, it's a done deal. It isn't there, so it doesn't have to wait to melt. So all there is about a meter or two of floating sea ice at the North Pole. That's all. There's no polar ice cap there. Next one. Well, what about the poor polar bears in the Arctic then? The EPA used as an argument to the Supreme Court to give it dictatorial powers to regulate carbon dioxide emissions, that it was causing great harm to human life and animal life, and that the polar bears were going to go extinct if we didn't do something really quickly. And here's the plight of the poor polar bear. Well, the truth is, the polar bear population is increasing. It's gone from, it's 5 times what it was in 1970. It's gone from 5,000 to about 25,000. These are USGS, from a USGS survey. And so you have to ask the question of what is it that's endangering the polar bears? Guess what's endangering the polar bears, if at all? It's hunters. The single greatest cause of death of polar bears is people shooting them. Let's see, we're losing things here. Okay. Oops. No, going the wrong way. while we're waiting here, the other